I got back on the bike, so to speak, and I was driving in Italy 2 weeks later after having my eye wound, which was pretty scary stuff.
Well, my ocular melanoma journey, as it's always called, started back in 2009 when I went to the doctors with a headache. And it was nothing serious, probably just stress at work or what have you. He thought it might be eye strain. And so he sent me to Specsavers, the opticians. And I went there and they took a picture of my eye and they noticed something was amiss. In fact, they saw a great big blotch on it. And that was the first I got to know that something was up. But I didn't take it very seriously. It's just, why would you think it's serious? And they sent me to a specialist eye centre locally to me. And the guy looked at it there and he saw that it was possibly a melanoma. But he said that he'd send me to somewhere else to have an ultrasound scan. So time passed, another month went by, and I had a scan. And I didn't get the results, and there was an awful lot of confusion, and my notes went missing. I mean, it was an absolute disaster, but I wasn't really bothered because, hey, I didn't think it was anything serious. So I thought one day I should phone up on the advice of my wife, Jen, who's kind of looked after me in the sense that she's making me make the right decisions. And I said, I said, what's happened with the results? And someone phoned me back, a secretary, said, oh, don't worry, it's nothing serious, it's not melanoma. And pretty much forgot about it. And it was only a year later when I had my eye looked at again that they noticed this otherwise benign thing had grown. And of course, then we were a little uncomfortable about it. And I was referred to a tertiary level service in Sheffield within 2 weeks. And they confirmed a melanoma diagnosis. And I was Googling melanoma, and that's when the shock hit me. And I thought, oh God, this is really serious. It suddenly became stressful for us. And we were finding out more and more dreadful things about how it could threaten my life. So anyway, within a week, I was in the hospital again up in Sheffield, and I was there for 3 days, and they sewed on a radioactive plaque. It's a treatment called brachytherapy, and it's like a coin. Imagine a coin that's just curved, like convex curved, and sewn onto the outside of your eyeball. Sounds a bit gruesome. And I just had that sat there for 3 days. I was radioactive. For a laugh in the hospital, I used to walk up to the Geiger counter that they kept in the room and set off the alarms. I had to pass the time somehow. And they wouldn't let me out because I could irradiate other people. And I was then told that I'd been monitoring, because the deal then is to check for, this is kind of the next stage of my journey, to check for ongoing surveillance for metastases, and which can primarily occur in the liver in ocular melanoma patients. And the tests they did at the hospital I was at was liver function tests, and they take a blood sample and they look at your blood and determine if your liver levels are okay. But if they find it through that, you usually, you're in trouble by then. And my wife, Jen, I'm sure single-handedly changed the policy because she just harangued them and correctly pointed out.
Local high street store, and they looked in my eye, and they saw this.
And things went steadily for the next 2 years, and we started to forget about it. And to be honest, we'd returned to normal fairly quickly after the initial diagnosis. But in 2012, June 2012, 2 years after I'd had the radiation treatment of my eye, they noticed that an edge had regrown on my eye. And we learnt that day that they were going to have to take my eye out, which was a real shock, and it was frightening. And I now know that I went through what I can recognise in hindsight as grief. And I was losing my eye, and I remember going out and looking at the flowers, and we went down to a place on the River Severn just to look at all the nice flowers, and I thought my left eye is not going to see anymore. My right eye I'll have for the rest of my life. So I was like, it's terrible. I was like treating it to a day out, a bizarre thing, and reading books with it and covering my right eye so that my left eye could be treated to reading some books and poetry and things. It was really strange. And of course the day came when I had the treatment, and it was around about the time that we discovered Jen was pregnant. And this is a time when, a happy time, and it has been happening. We've got a wonderful son, but it puts quite a dampener on it. That's quite an understatement. And it's a shame because our son's healthy and things. That's what really matters. But it was an odd moment to discover this, because we go to these sort of prenatal groups, and everyone else would be cheery and happy, and we were in the main, but we always had this thing like hanging over us. 18 months later, I was still having these ultrasound scans, and something odd cropped up on a scan. Our son now was he was less than a year old, and I was just being told I had liver metastases.
I run the MP&E ocular arm that we've set up a few months ago.
And it was such a, it just rocked our world. I mean, it's easy to use these terms, but we've got a little boy, and I'd go upstairs to try and research things. I could hear friends coming round, and I could hear Jen crying downstairs, weeping, thinking that I was on the way out, which I thought I was as well. And of course still may be, because I'm having to live with this stage 4 melanoma, ocular melanoma diagnosis. And, we got our heads around it and realised we had to take some action. What happened was that we ended up going to a team in Southampton, who are the best team in the UK, arguably the world, who have a particular interest in ocular melanoma. And so within a few weeks, I'd had all sorts of MRI scans, this, that and the other. And they put a camera inside me to see whether it was possible to cut the liver tumours out, and took a small sample while they were there just to confirm everything. And the upshot was that I was given the option to have a resection, which is where they take parts of your liver out. But in my case, it was in quite a lot of places. And they took 5 of the 8 lobes of the liver out, which is really significant. You can't take much more than that out. And they also found some in the 6th lobe, and they scooped that out as well. So I was on the borderline of not being able to have that as an option. And they wouldn't even know until the day they opened me up to do it, whether it was possible. It was spectacularly stressful. We've got a great marriage, and it pulls you together and things like this, but you need to be strong, and that pulled us together. The headlines of the main news were that the surgeon who was going to operate... The devastating news was that on Christmas Eve I was due for an appointment with my oncologist, and we were going to talk about the operation that I was having in January. And on the way to the appointment, I turned on the radio. It was Radio 4 and the BBC, and the main item on the 1 o'clock news was that a liver surgeon, the guy who was going to be operating on me, had been signing his name on his initials on people's livers when he was closing them up with the argon sealant gun or whatever, the tool. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was literally becoming surreal for me. I almost didn't believe it. And I mentioned it to my oncologist, and suddenly he said, "Oh, it's got out, has it?" He obviously knew about it. And suddenly, inexplicably, my appointment and everyone else's who was having liver operations were bumped 2 months down the line, by which stage that would have been too late for me. And we had the most stressful Christmas, because this was on Christmas Eve, that it's possible to have. Anyway, I had my treatment, and thankfully the operation was a big success. And I have a huge, massive 12-inch scar across my tummy, but it repaired itself, as livers do. They're completely regenerative. And within 3 months, I was back playing tennis and five-a-side football and doing all the things that I used to do. And I then started a course of, this is my kind of set of treatments. I started one of the immunotherapy drugs called ipilimumab. I had 4 doses of that, which is the standard way it's administered every 3 weeks. And nothing came back for over a year. I started a new drug called pembrolizumab, which is another immunotherapy drug, in June of 2015. A few weeks later, they saw on a scan that I had a new liver lesion, and that was well, that was stressful, but it was nothing. Nothing was in the same league as what had happened that Christmas. I don't think anything could be. And so I had to go in for a liver operation where they put a microwave rod into my liver and zapped it. And I had another lump under my right eye that started disappearing 2.5 months after my new treatment. So there was a suspicion that I might be responding. And right up until the present day, I've had nothing else. Our next ocular conference as well. So that's a useful thing. But these courses are wonderful.
So what about
I mean, as well as my own journey through ocular melanoma and fighting it as a patient individually with the family, I then started to get more involved because I realised there were more things that needed to be done in the wider melanoma and ocular melanoma landscape that I could be a part of, because I'd educated myself and I knew that others who'd gone before me had similarly educated themselves and were passing information to me. And it was a kind of natural progression that I got involved with the bigger, wider community. And now that's happened not just in the UK, but across Europe with MPNE. So it's kind of blossomed into something a lot bigger and a lot wider geographically, and with a number of people I'm now in contact with in the whole ocular melanoma landscape.